Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Brad Hurst here again with another video. Date today is January 11th, 2020. I'm kind of recovering from an injury to my leg. It's made it very difficult for me to work over the last week. But I wanted to do this video because I came across some information I thought would be very helpful. Last Sunday during Sunday school, the teacher teaching the class was going through Hezekiah, and he put forth an image of Hezekiah's signet ring, which I will actually show you later on, that kind of caught me by surprise, but because I didn't know about it, but it didn't catch me by surprise in the sense that I understand the world that they lived in at that time and how things worked a little bit. So when I saw that image, I decided to go through and do some research on my own, and came to some very, very, basically thought-provoking conclusions that I wanted to pass on to you. Now, you all know the story of Hezekiah, how his dad's name was Ahaz. He wasn't a very good king. In fact, he was very, very bad, and he was very pagan and idolatrous and so forth. And Hezekiah, when he became king, he began to go through the process of instituting reforms throughout the land. But there were a series of things that took place, and at one point in time, Hezekiah gets sick, and he discovers that he's going to die, and he's very distraught over this, and he begs and pleads before the Lord, and the Lord confirms to him that he's going to give him an extra 15 years, and he confirms it with a sign that we're going to be talking about, and it's a sign that I think it doesn't get a whole lot of attention, but it's very important. It's actually, when we understand what's going on, this is a stupendous event that takes place in the history not only of Hezekiah's life, but Israel and the history of the world as well. So let's go on to our slide. Isaiah 38, King James Version, and this shall be a sign unto thee from the Lord, that the Lord will do this thing that he hath spoken. Behold, I will bring again the shadow of the degrees, which has gone down in the sundial of Ahaz, 10 degrees backward, so that the sun returned 10 degrees, by which degrees it was gone down. All right, so the sign that Hezekiah is going to be given is going to be connected to a sundial. Now, I know some Bibles out there use the words the steps of Ahaz, but it's actually a sundial. In fact, you actually can see the words shemesh in the Hebrew, so that you can clearly understand this is a sundial. These aren't. This is not a stairway or staircase, as some places some Bibles have actually put forward. So, in this particular sundial, what's going to happen is there's going to be a shadow that's going to go back 10 degrees. Okay. And it's going to go back 10 degrees from which it has gone down in the sundial. And as a result, the sun is going to return itself by 10 degrees. Okay, it doesn't say go back here, but it's going to be returned back to probably what appears to be its original position with regard to this shadow. So we're going to be looking at this shadow, and this shadow is going to be going down 10 degrees, and then this shadow is going to return back, and the sun's going to be sort of kind of restored in the, shall we say, in the presentation of this sundial. Now, a lot of people have speculated, and I'll be honest, at one point in time I would have been one of them, is that a lot of people have speculated that this is talking about God stopping the rotation of the earth in some fashion, making the earth rotate backward, causing the shadows and stuff to move forward and backwards and so forth. But a lot of problems with that. First of all, with the plethora of civilizations around the world that were dependent upon the tracking of the sun and the moon and so forth, an event like that would have been recorded all over the world. I mean, it would have been so tremendous and so spectacular. It would have been it would be very difficult to think that this was only observed in Israel and recorded in Israel. In addition to that, the catastrophic damage that actually would do to the earth is more than can actually be stated, because of what that would do to tides and earthquake fault lines and volcanic activity and so forth. Not to mention that it would also mess up a lot of calendars and so forth. So Now, I do realize God is awesome and great and so forth, and He could, work around all those things. But I don't think that we need to go to, these big, tremendous, spectacular events unless the Bible actually says, that that's actually what they are. So I think that there's a better, more logical understanding of this, and we want to get into looking at that. So when we're talking about sundials, that's what we're talking about here. Let's have a look and see what we're talking about when it comes to a sundial. This is a Mesopotamian, Babylonian sundial that was used not just in Mesopotamia and Babylon, but we find them sundials like this in Greece and other places around the world. And so it's not a typical sundial the way that we would understand them. This sundial essentially is shaped kind of like a half-shaped bowl that's sort of kind of cut in half. And if I understand this correctly, you would have put a dome over the top of this thing, so you would essentially be looking into this half-shaped sphere. It may work without it, but there are other depictions that I will get to a little bit later on that show that this quite possibly had a dome that went over the top of it. So this here is the sundial that I believe that we're actually talking about. And we're going to go through and look at things here in just a second. As I'm going to kind of diagram this sundial out and how it actually worked. Okay, so here we have it. I've kind of sketched this out. I did this in a classroom yesterday between my at my lunch. So here we go. So this is kind of a diagram of what the sundial actually looks like that I just showed you. And essentially, here's the way it would work. You would actually, you would have, if your sun's rising over here, in the horizon, what you would end up doing is you would have this, the light coming through this hole like this, okay, and it would shine probably at this point in time, early in the morning, right here about this point. And over time, as the sun moves across the sky like this, okay, and ends up over here in the evening time, ends up over here. What ends up happening is this particular line right here will kind of arc up like this and come further and further down this way, and then eventually end up over here towards the end. And of course, you've got your hours right here with your first hour, your second hour, your third hour, and so forth and so on. And so your 12th hour would actually be right here. And depending on the time of year, during the winter solstice, this mark down here would actually be much more elongated because the sun would be shining much lower on the horizon as it came through here. So this might actually shine on the floor right through here, and this might have a very long beam of light coming through here like so. But during the, let's go ahead and erase this. During the time of the equinoxes, during the time of the equinoxes, or during the time of the summer solstice, this particular marking in here would actually move up and down through here. So in the wintertime, it would actually be much more elongated. In the summertime, it would be much shorter because the sun's higher in the atmosphere and then higher off the horizon. And then during the equinoxes, it would find probably a halfway point right in through here. So this arc that we have actually changes over time throughout the year. So that's kind of how I believe this actually works. Now, keep in mind, I said that this quite likely had a dome over the top of it. So you're basically looking inside of a, you would have a dome over this. So you'd actually be looking inside of a half-cut sphere. But it may work without it. I mean, I don't have one of these, so I can't tell. But based on what I can see, I believe this is a fairly easy thing to understand. So let's go ahead and cut these out here, and we'll just go on to our next slide. Okay, so here's a top view of our same device, and I've kind of got the presentation of the sun and how this may have actually worked from the perspective of a top view. So again, let me put this highlight on here. So again, this is your aperture right here, okay? And if you notice that this aperture, it's concaved, so that it's wider on the inside than it is on the outside. And the reason for that is so that it can actually allow the light to come through and reflect on the inside of the dome much earlier than it would if it was just a straight hole, because it would take several hours for the light to be able to get through the aperture if we didn't do that. So, or if they didn't do that. So, and I didn't number the hours here, but of course your hours are marked right here. Let me go ahead and highlight this. Your hours are marked, right here. So with your first, your second, your third, all the way to what would be your 12th hour, which is right here. So essentially, your light is coming, across this way, like so. And so, as I had mentioned earlier in the previous slide, what would happen is that throughout the year, the light would shine either further up inside the dome. So in other words, on the shortest day of the year, the light would be coming through here at 12 noon, and it might even shine all the way off here because the sun is lower in the horizon. But then in summertime, it might shine like right here, or something like this, depending on the angle where this thing is located and so forth. And then during the equinoxes, it would find a halfway point, maybe perhaps something like right here. So this would actually be your 6th hour. So that would be your high point for the sun. No matter what time of year it is, the 6th hour would always be the high point of the time of each day. So what you can see is that this right here is your sun right here, and then I've got the light coming through the aperture like so, and it would reflect at this point right here, probably right around, this would actually be the middle of the 2nd hour of our, if I understand this correctly. So that shines, it actually hits right here. Here's your reflection right here, and when it does this is that because it's actually just peeking right through this point right through here, you're only going to see kind of like a crescent portion of the sun, sort of kind of like this. I'd assume it would actually be in this position right here. So you would see only a crescent portion of it. And it might, in fact, this might even be really super elongated, like maybe more like this, because of the angle with which it's actually coming through. And over time, as it moves across and gets to the point where it's actually shining straight through the aperture, this would be probably, depending on the time of year and where it's at, this would actually be elongated like so. Okay, so so I believe this is actually how this would work. I'm always wanting to be corrected on this, but just by observation, this looks very plausible. So anyway, let's go on to our next slide. So I just want to give a bit of a demonstration as to how, a little bit more information on how this would work. This is a depiction of the aperture inside the sundial, and normally you'd just be looking, the sun's coming right through this aperture through here. On a normal day, your sun would be moving from an east to a westerly direction, as we have depicted with the movement with it coming from this direction like so. So as your sun came through there in the morning time, you would have a sort of kind of a contorted reflection on the opposite side of your sundial, so that over time your sun's image would, the image inside the sundial itself would actually get bigger and diminish towards the end of the day. So you got your sun moving in this direction across your aperture. Then when if you take into consideration a solar eclipse, you still got your sun moving in this direction like this, but then you end up having your solar eclipse, or not your moon in a solar eclipse, moving in this direction. Okay, So essentially your sun is moving this way across the aperture, and then your moon is moving this way across the aperture. And as a result, the light or the shadow that's going to be cast by the moon is going to be projected this way, and the shadow is going to be reflecting on the opposite side of the, depending on the time of day when this takes place, that's going to be reflecting on the opposite side of the sundial. You would still, in this particular scenario we have right here, you would still have some light coming through, but depending on where the moon's at in this whole process, depends on what the shadow's going to look like and how the moon's moving and so forth. And this is a real basic, rudimentary presentation. It's not in any way a scientific one, but I think it goes to serve our purpose for what we're doing. Okay, so here again we're actually looking at the top view, and so how would this actually work during a lunar, or I keep saying lunar, I mean a solar eclipse. And so essentially what you've got is you've got your moon coming across this direction like so, and then your sun is actually moving in this direction like so, and without the moon here, you would actually literally have, the light shined all the way through here, and you would have a fully intact reflection of the light right here. But with the moon coming in and messing everything up, we end up having a little bit different of a scenario. So let's have a look at how this would actually work. Get rid of these here so they don't confuse us. All right. So essentially, because of the moon, which this is, the moon is right here, with the moon coming in this direction, the light is actually being blocked, okay, and it just would go and shine on here. And so you would have right here, I'm going to change this to blue, right here you would have a shadow, and this shadow would be reflected in connection with the light. All right, now, if you remember, let me change this back here. If you remember when I said it was actually when it was shining through, because of the angles and so forth, your aperture would show a light pattern somewhat like this. I mean, I would assume that it would look something like this. It might be much more elongated, so that when your moon starts coming through and starts blocking this, you end up, here's your moon, I'm just kind of putting it like this. Your moon is blocking this, and then as the moon moves across, in other words, as the moon moves this way, this shadow is going to come, down, is what it's going to do. In other words, it's going to be coming down across this way like so. I'm not speculating here. I'm trying to do this based on calculations and physics and angles and so forth. But I believe this is how this would actually present itself under a certain scenario. And so I think that this is a possibility here. So we actually see the shadow of the moon coming down like this. All right. So let's go on to our next slide here. In 702, or actually 701 BC, using stellarium, a partial solar eclipse took place. You can see your moon. It's kind of highlighted through here, all right? And then this is the ecliptic line right here. This is the ecliptic line of the sun, and the moon is going to be following a path sort of kind of like this as it crosses the sun. It's going to take place over a couple of hours. And so you would end up with a partial solar eclipse taking place on March 5th, 701 BC using stellarium. Now keep in mind, stellarium accounts for the year 0, so when you actually look at the NASA website, they would actually have this date right here being 702 BC because they don't account for the year 0, and you can clearly see right here that this is actually, if I can see, this right here says this is actually Jerusalem. So we're in Jerusalem. It's King Hezekiah is the king. It's at the right time of the year. It's at the right time in his life, and we actually have a solar eclipse taking place in Jerusalem. Not only just over Jerusalem, but this is actually seen all throughout the Middle East. In fact, in the land of Midian, this would have appeared as a total solar eclipse. So essentially you're going to have something like this, where your moon is coming across the sun. It's casting a shadow inside the sundial. That shadow is coming down, and it's going to stop and turn around. It's going to retreat and go back up. So in other words, your shadow is going to go backwards. That's what's going to happen. So to kind of buttress the presentation that we just gave with the eclipse using a stellarium, essentially what we've got happening is that we have the sun goes throughout the day. The sun moves this way across the inside of the sundial. In other words, your basically your hole's up here, and as your sun comes in, I'm just darken this in. As your sun comes in, okay, this light reflecting will essentially move across the sundial like this as the sun moves in this direction. So let's go ahead and erase some of this here. And then when we end up having the moon come in, we'll change this for the moon. When we end up having the moon come in, of course, we got your sun sitting right here. Here's the sun. But then you end up going to having the moon come in. And as the moon is coming in, it's starting to infringe upon the sun. All right, you're going to start getting a shadow. Get a better moon here. You're going to start getting a shadow, as I show the shadows actually being represented right here. Okay. Now the moon is the sun is moving this way. Okay, and then the moon is moving this way, but this whole presentation is moving across this, essentially moving across the hole here. Okay, the aperture, the whole thing's moving across the hole. So essentially, as things develop over time, the sun and the moon are moving across this way, and over time, the shadow of the moon is infringing more and more upon the sun as it moves across. All right, and so this whole thing is moving this way like so. All right, so but if the moon were to move backwards, this shadow, okay, this shadow would move in this direction. It would move backwards. That's from what I can understand, that's how it would work. Now, some people would ask, well, Brad, you've talked about in the past how the Jewish people are on a lunar calendar. Wouldn't this mess up the calendar, and maybe not just the calendar, but for the Jewish people, but for the rest of the world? And let me just state that I don't really think that it would actually be too much of a problem for a variety of different reasons, but one I want to point out. Okay, when you actually look at the Jewish calendar, it's following a lunar cycle, and so you would have your new moon would be right here, and then that would be day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, and this would be your Sabbath. And so each one of these following right through here, these would be your Sabbath moons, and then of course your last Sabbath moon would be on the dark moon. And then you'd have another day here, which is also a dark moon. So the period, what's interesting is the period from essentially from here through here is an indeterminate amount of time. Your lunar cycle goes from anywhere from 29 to 29.5 days, right? And so this right here would be the sun coming across the moon coming across the sun, and so your solar eclipse can only happen essentially right here, right around in this period, right through here. In other words, it can only happen on the Sabbath. I think that's kind of neat. But anyway, there was some problems with being able to determine exactly when this point in time took place, because there are regular perturbations that take place as the sun, as the moon moves across the face of the sun. And so that's why they say it's anywhere from 29 to 29 and a half days that it takes place. And so you literally have about a 12-hour variance. And so any type of, there are regular perturbations that take place all the time. And this was known as the day of the unknown day and the unknown hour, because they didn't know exactly when it passed across, and they treated this like a 2-day Sabbath. And what's interesting is that, you know, here it is on your last day here it is on the last day, the day before the Sabbath, and all of a sudden you got 2 days and it's gone, and then it rises again on the third day. That's kind of funny. So you got it, you know, disappearing right here, and then it's gone from sight, and then it rises over here on the third day. Sound familiar? I think that's kind of fun. But anyway, basically your solar eclipse happens right here, and this is not really much of a problem if you're going to pull the moon back for the space of about an hour or so. Perturbations are actually taking place here, and so it wouldn't create too much problem on your calendar, because your calendar was being adjusted every month anyway, because this passage between the 28th and the 29th onto the 1st had a variance of about 12 hours that they had to adjust every month. So don't think that's much of a problem. Now, not all solar eclipses are full solar eclipses, but when a full solar eclipse does take place, you kind of get an image that would sort of kind of look like this. Not as spectacular, but you see kind of like all this sort of like I'm gonna call it a wing type depiction right through here. Okay, this is actually the aurora of the sun coming off the sun, and it's hot gases that are coming off as the sun is spewing off its energy. And so you would actually be able to see this if you could actually look straight at it. But there were ways in the ancient world where they were able to look at things like this. And I don't know if they did it through, you know, basically eyepieces that, you know, had shaded glass or whatever. But you could actually take a piece of material, put a hole in it, and then you know, angle this your item with the hole in it in such a way that you're lining it up perfectly with the sun, and with the sun behind you, you've got the light going through the hole, and then the light's actually hitting the ground, and you would possibly see a faint image of this aurora right through here. So, but we do know that they were able to see this in some fashion because of some images that we can actually see. So let's go look at some of these here real quick. Okay, this is a device that would appears to be used for being able to observe a solar eclipse. And essentially what you would do is you would take this this device here, and you would hold it up maybe like over your shoulder or up over your head or something in such a way that you would be able to reflect on, it would actually allow the light to come through this hole right here, okay, as your sun would be back here, and the light would be coming through this hole right here, and it would reflect on another surface, either on the ground or another surface that's being held in front of it, and you would actually be able to see the solar eclipse. So in other words, the sun is behind you, and the sun's coming through that top hole, and it's reflecting on a surface that's in front of this item or in front of you. And what ironically this happens to be that essentially this piece right here sort of kind of looks like the bottom portion of our sundial. And according to the information I got, where I got this slide from, this person right here is supposedly Gilgamesh, and that these are on either side of him are two centaurs that are helping him hold up this eclipse. And so you would actually look through this. You wouldn't look through this hole, but the sun would come through this hole, reflect off of the surface in front of it, and you would actually be able to see the eclipse. And if this hole's big enough, you would literally be able to see the wings of the aurora. And I don't know how bright it would be, but it would be visible. And I believe that those wings are, depicted, off of this with the tail and what have you. So I don't think it's a stretch to be able to say that. So yeah. These are Mesopotamian depictions of eclipses, and as you can clearly see, that they seem to depict pretty much the same type of characteristic, where you have your basically your eclipsed sun right through here, and then you got the wings of your aurora coming off on both sides of it, and then you've got your tail section. So not all eclipses are going to present in the same exact way, but essentially they show more. This one here shows more of an aurora up on top, one more on this one, and maybe this, you look at these pieces right through here. Maybe this is telling us this took place during the seventh sun. I can't say for sure, but these do seem to reflect the imagery of what an eclipse would actually look like. And based on our previous slide, where we see that there would actually be a hole where you could actually allow the sunlight to come through, I think that there's a reasonable assumption. So let's go look at our next slide here. Again, this one is Egyptian, and again, you can see the sun right there, and it's ironic because right below it, you actually see this Ankh thing right here, and there's a lot of speculation as to what this actually, is in terms of actually symbology, but it appears to be based on information that we've got from other places. You can see it over here. You can see a person here holding, placing this Ankh on some sort of pedestal, and what looks like a person is actually looking through this. Possibly looking through this. I don't know. You've got one over here, somebody looking through this as well. You got somebody holding this Ankh up, and they're looking through this Ankh and at the sun that's actually coming up. So I don't think it's unreasonable to think that this Ankh might actually have been a device for observing solar eclipses, or at least measuring them or recording them in some fashion. Somehow or another, but you can clearly see the sun with the wings on it, and I don't think it's unreasonable to think that this could actually be how they depicted solar eclipses in the ancient world. Again, we have an imagery that's very similar. You can see the sun and the wing imagery represented here, and I don't think that that this is beyond reason to be able to state that this is how they depicted solar eclipses in the ancient world. All right, so I'm going to camp on this slide here for just a few minutes, as I want to explain some things about the ancient world. Back in my Ancient Astronomy and the Great Red Dragon series, I believe it's either video number 7 or number 8. You can go back and look at that and kind of learn more about this. I talk about an individual by the name of Marduk. Marduk is the supreme god in the ancient world, and he has different names all over the ancient world. All right, and so and then he had all kinds of little sub-deities and gods under him that were kind of like regional gods. But Marduk is the supreme god in the ancient world, and he's represented in different places throughout Mesopotamia down into Egypt. In Babylon, he's Marduk. In Assyria, he's Ashur. And what we're looking at right here is we're seeing depictions, Assyrian imagery of their supreme god, Ashur, who was actually the sun god is what he was, okay? So the story with Marduk is that Marduk was a deity who was actually the son of another deity by the name of Anu. And if I remember correctly, Anu wanted to destroy another deity. It was a transgender god by the name of Tiamat. Actually, it was Anu's lover, and she had corrupted the planet and the world and mankind and so forth, so much so that Anu wanted to destroy her, and he tasked Marduk with the task of doing it, and Marduk ended up destroying Tiamat and casting her into the lower parts of the earth, or into Sheol or Hades, or whatever you want to refer to it as. This is a Babylonian creation image. Doesn't mean that I actually believe this. I'm just telling you this is the worldview of the pagans at the time. So so the reward for Marduk was that his father would give him all authority both in heaven and in earth, and that would basically be personified by Marduk having control over what's called the crossings, or then the Beru. All right. The crossings refer to two astronomical, or what they would refer to as astrological concepts. The first one would be the equinoxes. That would be when the sun passes over the equatorial line in the sky. All right, and then that would happen in spring and also in fall. But then there was also another type of crossing where the moon would cross over in front of the sun through what's referred to as the ecliptic line. All right, that was also referred to as the crossing. Okay, and that would take place during a solar eclipse or also a lunar eclipse. And Marduk supposedly says he created a dragon, a red dragon specifically, with the intent of guarding the crossings. Okay, and then nobody went above or below the crossings without the governance, the permission, and the aid of Marduk and or his dragon. And so the crossings, the eclipse points, and the equatorial points, the way they understood it, those were the sole domain of Marduk, who was the supreme authority of the heavenlies and of everything on earth as well. So understand that every society in that part of the world, from Egypt to Mesopotamia, parts of Greece and so forth, they all had this concept of Marduk, but they had different names for him. They worshipped him under different names. The Babylonians worshipped him as Marduk, and the Assyrians worshipped him as Ashur. And in this particular imagery right here, you can actually see that this is the god Ashur, and you see him sitting here in the winged position of the eclipse. Here's another example of the sun in the eclipse, and here's yet Ashur again in the winged position of the eclipse. So this is Ashur / Marduk. You got him here as well, also in this gigantic presentation of an eclipse right through here, and you have what appears to be a device that's very similar to what appears to be an ankh, and this is sitting on top of a bull's head, indicating possibly that this eclipse that's being referred to is an eclipse that took place either in Taurus or referring to the first equinox of Taurus back in 4004 BC. I can't get into all of that, but what happened over time, starting with Nimrod, there began to become the cult of pagan, or shall we say, emperor worship, and the emperor would be presented as the physical manifestation of Marduk on earth. So whenever you saw a depiction of an emperor, oftentimes you would see him depicted in this position, where Marduk or Ashur or whatever he was known by in that area, the emperor would be depicted in this position as Marduk himself. All right? And so that was not uncommon. In fact, it was very common, and it was particularly common with the Assyrians. And this is interesting to note that it was Assyria that was basically pressing upon Hezekiah at this point in time. Well, with everything we've looked at so far, the promise of Isaiah 38 and the language in there, the sundial, the eclipse, ancient eclipse imagery, Assyria, Ashur, Marduk, it seems to be fairly easy to conclude that we can determine that this was an eclipse. But maybe we can let Hezekiah himself tell us. Let's have a look. This is a image of Hezekiah's signet ring. It was discovered, I think it was back in 2009, if I remember correctly. But this, you see some imagery here that looks somewhat familiar. You can see here, you can see the sun with the with the wings coming off of this. So this is your winged disc sun, what you've got here. And then in addition to this, you're going to have the ankhs that you can see on either side of it. Your ankhs would actually be these devices right here. Okay, and you got one over here as well. And then you have a pre-Babylonian form of Hebrew script that actually says Hezekiah on it, and I'm told that the rest of it says son of Ahaz. So, folks, is it unreasonable to assume that Hezekiah is his signet ring is marked with what appeared to be Babylonian and even Egyptian type of imagery with relation to a solar eclipse? I don't think so. I think that Hezekiah is kind of speaking to us right here that the sign that God gave him was a solar eclipse. And in that solar eclipse, that there was an event where essentially the moon was drawn back and the shadow inside the sundial went back. In other words, it went back up. And this is incredibly important because keep in mind that Hezekiah is living in a world where the worldview is a Mesopotamian worldview from Egypt all the way to in Greece and even into Iran and even further east. It is a Mesopotamian worldview tailored after a god by the name of Marduk, who's supposed to be the supreme being over heaven and earth, having authority over heaven and earth, and whose abode is in the crossings, the ecliptic and equatorial line, and that only he and his dragon, whom he appointed to guard that, can grant permission or even assist anybody or anyone from heaven into earth, but also, or from earth into heaven, and also that no body, no celestial body or nothing whatsoever can cross over those lines without his governance, his permission, and so forth. And what happens is Jehovah tells Hezekiah, who's being besieged by the Assyrians, whose god is Ashur, whose image is the eclipse itself, and all of a sudden God says, I'm going to step right into the world, into that domain that Marduk, Ashur, has assumed for himself, and that the very kings themselves, seeing themselves as Marduk as incarnate here on earth, or Ashur incarnate on earth, I'm going to step right into that world, the place where they say it's their abode and their abode only, and I'm going to manipulate their world by pulling the moon back, making the shadow go forward, or go back and go back up that sundial. All right? It would be impossible for me to think that somehow or another that when Hezekiah was given that sign, or told that that sign was coming, that he would not have told people. There would have been people all over the Mesopotamian world watching these eclipses. And can you imagine what went through the world, the shockwave that went through when all of a sudden that which Hezekiah was told by Jehovah would happen actually happened? All right? And it happens to be, this is very closely connected to the 180,000 people that would, 180,000 Assyrians that were killed, and later was Sennacherib retreating and eventually be killed himself. And within 90 years, the Assyrian Empire completely falling and collapsing, being overrun by Babylon. This is Pharaoh Akhenaten, around 1300 BC, right around 1300, 1330 BC, and you can clearly see the circle right there in the middle, and then the lines coming off of it, with the oblong shapes at the end of it, marking different solar eclipses over the years. And I don't know if these are solar eclipses that took place during his time, but as you can see, some of them like right here, and here's one over here. I don't know if these are solar eclipses that took place during his time, or if this is actually basically depicting an entire Saros cycle, which is a whole other subject altogether. But it's very clear that this practice of tracking solar eclipses had gone on long before Hezekiah's time. This particular imagery dates right around 300, 320 AD. So it's roughly about 1,000 years after Hezekiah. But this is basically a headstone or a gravestone in one of the catacombs, and it's marking it's dedicated, or the person who's this is involved with is a guy by the name of Severus. And in the center, you can see this crowned wreath. You have the X in it for the first letter for Christ, and the R, what would be our R sound for the second letter for Christ. And then to the left-hand side, you have a very, very similar looking item to our sundial. You have what I believe is a sundial, and this sundial, I don't know if it has a lid on top of it right here, or if this whole egg-shaped type thing is your sundial. I'm assuming that this might actually be a dome that's put over the top of it, but I really don't know. But you can clearly see through here, there's a very, very clear depiction of a hole, of an aperture right through here, and what looks like the marking of the sun coming down through here with this little line right through here. And what's kind of interesting is if you go over here, I got Hezekiah's coin right here, or his signet, and you got the same thing marking right here with this aperture, and or with the circle there, and this coin coming down, or not this coin, but this line coming down through there. So let me get this out of here so you can actually see it better. So then you can see this right through here. Okay, so I've got those erased. But what is interesting about the sundial on the left is that it only has 9 time zones. It's got one right here, it's got one here, it's got one right here, it's got one here, and then of course there would be one right smack through the center here. You got one here, 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 and you're ending right here. So you would literally be going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So why is that? How come our other one appeared to have 12 and this one appeared to have 9? Well, they had problems with these sundials in the sense that there was only basically 2 days out of the year where you had exactly 12 hours. So, and that was both of the equinoxes. And then when you came to summer, you had more than 12 hours. You had about 15 hours. And then during the winter solstice, you had roughly about 9 hours. And so this particular sundial seems to be referencing the winter solstice, drawing attention to the winter solstice for whatever reason. So anyway, let's go ahead and wrap this up. I hope you found this helpful. This is something I like to just do. I enjoy doing this. It's a lot of fun. It beats watching TV and wasting my time doing other things. It takes time to put these things together, but I don't go around looking for things and so forth. If something comes up, I like to go in there and just look, see what I can find, and oftentimes, they're basically just misses, but sometimes you come across one and they're a real good hit. I started to kind of think about this a little bit more last Sunday when I had someone, my Sunday school teacher, actually show us my Sunday school teacher showed us the seal for Hezekiah, and he didn't really know what this is actually reflecting, but I instantly recognized it. And so I began to do a little bit more research and was able to put things together, and I think it's pretty clear. Hezekiah's event was a solar eclipse wherein God pulled the moon back, and hence the shadow inside the sundial went back, and God was confirming a sign or a promise that he gave to Hezekiah that he would live another 15 years, but in so doing, he was walked right into the territory of the pagans of not only Babylon, but also Egypt and Assyria, of which kingdom was actually pressing upon Hezekiah, and said, I'm going to walk right into the abode that you claim you're God's own on their own, and I'm going to manipulate their world as you see it, and I'm going to make a sign for my servant using your system, okay? And the whole world would have seen, not the whole world, but the whole Mesopotamian world and all of the Middle Eastern world would have actually seen this, and it would have sent shockwaves around about, especially if Hezekiah had actually mentioned beforehand that this event would take place. So I hope you have enjoyed this, and have a good rest of the day.